Climate change is a very big topic, and it's going to take the work of every community and every nation around the world to really make an impact and try to save what we do have here in our own communities now.
Climate change is inevitable. Adaptation is optional. What we're here to talk about today are the options that we can go through, the kind of things we need to do. How do we guide people? As few of us as there are who are really into this and working on these issues, we have to find a way to take the strength that we have and really be able to use those traditional teachings and use those things that are part of our spirituality. We have to use that to help guide the rest of humanity if we and they are going to survive.
I guess generally as a weather pattern in our community, probably looking more at like the storm events being much more larger, more flooding, but then there's long kind of drought periods in between. So there's not a regular set of precipitation, whether it be rain or snow in the wintertime. It all kind of comes in bunches and then nothing. I know last year it was rain. We had a lot of rain, and then so it flooded a lot of our crops, and we had a poor season, and then it got cold quick, so it was really hard on our crops last year in particular. This year we're happen to be faring a little bit better, a little bit more regular rain events rather than storms, and then had pretty decent weather this year for our crops. And then as climate change also affects of that is our health, our tribal members' health. We have a lot more higher incidences of respiratory illnesses, and also asthma is kind of on the climb, and kind of a lot of that could be contributed to the greenhouse gases and smog, as we live here on the Oneida Reservation, or right on the Green Bay, city of Green Bay comes onto our reservation. But a lot of that pollution comes from much larger cities further to the west of us, in different states even, like Minneapolis, St. Paul, Minnesota.
The biggest impact that I've seen within my community with climate change is drought. Our winters have become less moisture, less snow, less rainfall in the spring. The glaciers in the mountains that we have are reducing, so that's the biggest climate change that I see going on within our area.
So some of the stuff we try to do when we educate our community, our organization, is let them know climate change is a long-term. Climate is long-term, weather is short-term. So some of the things that's unique to Oneida, where we be next to Green Bay, Wisconsin, is we have a lot of infrastructure. We have buildings, we have drainage systems, we have a wastewater treatment plant. So one of the unique things about Oneida is we need to protect our infrastructure from the changes in climate. The changes that the climate is going to bring, increased rain events, increased strength of storms. We have to make sure our infrastructure is protected. Unique to other tribes that may be more rural in nature that are dealing with other issues. That's, I think, a unique thing to Oneida that we need to do.
One of the things that I think that we're missing here is the importance of our white corn and the importance of our food, and trying to tie that together. So we talk about even decolonization. From what I'm gathering and learning and being around people of all color, is that decolonization happens with our language and with our food. So when we talk about climate change, and we talk about some of the issues that we're having, so if you look at Juhinko as a program within the structure here, it's one of the main programs that is pounding out the white corn. Amazing, yes, definitely amazing. So when something happens like weather, something happens like pest, so we didn't deal with the corn borer worm last year, but we're dealing with this year. Last year we dealt with the freeze. This year we're dealing with warmer temperatures.
We have a farm that we're developing. We've established it as an organic farm with about 3 acres at this point. But working in the soil and walking the entire property and knowing it really well by now, I've noticed that there's when the rain bursts come, there was plenty of rain, but the force of the raindrops hitting or coming in was really quick. It's like it hit hard and then left. But the force part of the rain and the wind with it, it seemed like it bent over the corn. It just had more intensity than previous seasons.
The U.S. and Cuba are going to do offshore drilling possibilities today. It's not looking good. And then I run into the same bathroom. I run into Patricia, and then on the bottom, on the Hurricane Patricia, and then on the bottom, it's about the refugees. And they're refugees for climate change. Like my brother and I were talking, they're refugees of climate change. That can happen to us. And all of these are warnings, all of these are clear signs of what we're living. And so I don't think it's looking good, but I do have hope. And I think it's looking good because our tribal nations, our communities are acting.
I think primarily we have drought conditions in our area, in our region. We've had some flooding in the past couple of months, or back in the month of June, but since then we've reverted back to the drought conditions. We don't have enough rainfall. In addition, we have some the natural disasters of tornadoes and those types of things, earthquakes, that the tremors that have not really caused extensive damage in my area, but they're really areas of concern because who knows when the next one's going to be a major one.
Well, I represent the Columbia River Intertribe Fish Commission, and we represent the 4 treaty tribes that fish along the Columbia River. With global warming and the lack of snowfall, the low river flows in the tributaries, it's going to really affect our fishermen because of the 70-degree water is really bad for our salmon. And the salmon that did survive this summer, they go to their tributaries or their homelands, and there's lack of spawning water there. And the ones that do get there, if there's a spawning ground, then they have no water flow to get down the river. So it's really going to be really detrimental, and it's started.
When I was a kid growing up, we had rains and snows that we could depend on all the time. But then the 2 power plants came into our neighborhood that burn high sulfur coal. And now we're in a drought. And we don't get the rains and the snows that we used to. And when I was growing up, we could see all kinds of flowers all through the desert areas, all kinds of colors. But now it's just brown. And the wind comes, and there's a lot of movement with the sand. A lot of the topsoil has blown off. And now we grow corn, and it's half the size that it used to be. So we know that the impact of climate change is really adversely impacting our livelihood, our farming, our agriculture, and it's just hurting everything.
For the Menominee, where we have a forest that's been something that sustained us over many generations, whether it was through subsistence, hunting, gathering, or the more recent sustainable forestry management. So the majority of our reservation is forested, and it's managed for timber resources, which go through our sawmills. So this has been a large part of our community for over 100 years now. One of the things that I see, just as a tribal member and working in this area, has been that there are so many issues impacting our forest, the diversity of tree species that we have. We see invasive species are probably something that more people notice right away because the impacts are more noticeable, defoliation, just trees dying from different insects and disease. But the question of how does climate change accelerate or impact these issues, that's something that we're currently working on trying to figure out.
Well, I think we're looking at our comprehensive strategic planning, how that incorporates climate change issues that are going on. And then that's related, of course, to our safety planning and our emergency planning. So the theory is the better strategic comprehensive plan you have, the better safety plan you have, the better emergency plan you have, and less issues as they connect.
The International and Treaty Council was founded in 1974 out of a long period of turmoil where indigenous peoples, American Indians were standing up for our rights in the United States with marches across the country, takeovers of the BIA building, armed standoffs at Wounded Knee, the occupation of Alcatraz Island, fishing rights struggles, and many other ways that did not get the response that we had hoped for from the United States government. In fact, a lot of repression happened. Leonard Peltier is still in prison to this day from that time. And in 1974, the International Indian Treaty Council was formed on Standing Rock Reservation in South Dakota with a decision that was based on the instruction of the elders to find a voice internationally to address our rights, including our treaty rights as nations. And that place was the United Nations. So in 1977, the International Indian Treaty Council, or Iitc for short, was the first indigenous organization to get what's called consultative status with the United Nations Economic and Social Council. And in 2011, we were the only indigenous organization to be elevated to what's called general consultative status. But the good news is we started out by ourselves in that work, and now thousands of indigenous peoples, nations, tribes, communities, and organizations from literally every continent and every hemisphere of the world are participating in those international discussions, including the one that we're going to talk about today, which is the International United Nations work on climate change.
What does that mean? It means that these greenhouse gases are going up, they know it's dangerous, and we have to try to bring them down. Basically, that's what it's about. We're just producing too much carbon in a way that the Earth cannot sustain this, at least for us to be around. Indigenous peoples would be at risk of loss of land and cultural natural heritage, and cultural practices embedded in livelihoods would be disrupted. So they know right now if that temperature goes up beyond that 1.5, it's gonna affect our peoples, not only here in North America, but around the world. Especially what I want to stress is the urgency, right, of pressuring states. So we need folks to be writing letters, to be writing letters to head of state, to at the national level, etc. And through Treaty Council, we're looking forward to working with any of you on these issues to really, and try to find creative ways to keep pressuring not only the United States, but Canada and everyone else.
It's a real pleasure to be able to introduce you today, and I'm looking forward to your message. Thank you.
How do you educate, how do you instruct 7.3 billion people as to their relationship with the Earth? Because if you don't understand that relationship with the Earth, are part of nature, we are part of the environment, then we will suffer. It's been my experience, my understanding is that nature has no mercy. It only has rules and law. And you abide those rules and law for some prayers and things like that are important and should be continued. Our personal conduct and how we affect the environment around us will determine how we survive and how our children will manage the coming years.
I think it's very important that we really take a hard look at it and figure out what is best to slow down climate change. I think we're probably beyond the point where You could stop it. I don't think that's reasonable at this point, but trying to mitigate those changes, you know, the greenhouse gas emissions and the such, that they should be rolled back, and alternative energy really invested in as a you know, a nation, United States, you know, really investing in that, you know, the solar and the wind that we do have here, and kind of maybe slow down those subsidies on the fossil fuels and the such, so that we have that the whole nation as a whole is leaning towards, you know, green energy. And energy efficiencies also has a lot to do with our energy consumption in the United States. So I would really like to see some more money put towards efficiencies also, whether that be better insulating the homes, or higher, you know, mileage out of the vehicles, or, you know, mandating higher efficiencies of, you know, home furnaces, you know, changing the light bulbs. You know, there's so much simple things that we can do as an individual that have a great impact on the environment.
I guess the big picture is that we can do all we want. We can do restoration projects that perhaps reduce the amount of carbon, but until that faucet is turned off, nothing that we do is going to make a difference. So I'd like to see the United States become the world leader we are in many different areas in climate change, in reducing carbon, reducing fossil fuel usage, and having a plan for the future. What are we going to do? We look to the government, I guess, to guide us and say, this is where we're going to be in the future.
I think to at least hear our voice, that this is it affects our people. It's our traditional food. It's our traditional with the foods that we eat. It affects our traditional berries that we pick, and it's just something that really needs to be aware, and that, you know, with these fossil fuels, we can reduce that somehow.
The United States needs to be more proactive in being aware of and understanding the impacts of climate change. It needs to sign on as a participating country government, because and show the leadership that it's supposed to be throughout the world, and come into terms with carbon burning, and just doing all they can to protect the future of our children.
Bigger push for getting the word out to everybody of how important and how devastating, you know, it's going to be to the world and to just all of us.
Pass the laws and rules and regulations that will affect some positive results. And I think also the United States ought to allow tribes to develop those rules and regulations and environmental rules that affect their lands. They're closest to the lands that they operate and live on, and so they ought to have equal protection and rights, just as states do under the laws.
There's things that we can do locally, that we should do locally, that's important, because this is, as we've heard different speakers and have been to different meetings, the common refrain is it's a common issue. It impacts us all. And so we have an individual responsibility, we have a communal responsibility in the place, the communities that we're part of, but also it's larger than that. There's so much development and emphasis on globalization, making us a large global community, that it is necessary for nations, the United States, to do something. It's necessary for forums like the United Nations to come together to do something. And so it's important across all of those levels. It's no longer an issue that can be addressed at just a few or one of these levels.
The one other point I guess I have of concern is the role of the non-governmental organization in relationship to the government organizations. There's certainly Treaty Council as the NGO has a key role. The Indigenous Environmental Network has a role. Honor to Earth, from an Indigenous standpoint, have different roles. And then the non-Indian community has their own NGOs, the Extreme Energy Coalition, for example. And then again, back just as one example on the issue of climate change, where is this energy coming from? Where is it going? The indigenous community with NCAI, National Congress of American Indians, to a regional level with the Midwest Alliance of Sovereign Tribes, to the state level of Great Lakes Intertribal Council, to the United Nations Council. There's a concept of relationship there that certainly could be enhanced, and I believe is maximized when there's a better communication relationship between all of those.
The Creator intended that there be a balance in all of nature. But today, the equilibrium of the world is precariously out of balance. The bursting of toxic waste into our life-giving rivers is a message we cannot ignore. The unmitigated exploitation of the world must end. The damage done to the earth by this exploitation must be repaired. The changing conditions of the world we cannot ignore. The pollution, the drought, the raging wildfires, the melting glaciers, the rising oceans, and the ever-increasing scarcity of water the world over. It is urgently imperative that we protect our waters.
It's about making sure that we have our traditional corn so that we stay true to our ceremonies, because the cycles are now changing where our green corn stage is not hitting our green corn ceremony, and there's some bartering there, I'm sure that is happening. And so we have to, that's a big climate change issue, that we have to face. And so again, I think how we need to change that and how we need to protect that is by having more growers.
Really? What if toxicity in the environment was a crime? One of the ways that we can enforce that is by holding corporations and entities that pollute accountable. And that's something that Treaty Council does at the international level. I hope that the United States and the United Nations contributes to promoting policy of ecological integrity as a primary model to reverse climate change, or one of the primary models, instead of selling credits. We cannot take those solutions of selling credits.
Our hope is that we can get all of our departments, all our divisions within the tribe, to start thinking about climate change. How are you going to plan according to climate change projections? What's going to happen? What's going to be the impact to our health center? When we have an increase in invasive species and different diseases that come with that. What crops should we plant? What trees should we plant? What school, what areas of study should our kids be in? Climate change is going to have an impact on all of this stuff, not just environmental, but everything that we do.
Well, I think our environmental department has done a lot of great informational, getting stuff out there to our community members and offering programs for having their energy efficiency of their homes tested, and then putting going after grants for our tribal buildings. We own several buildings to make them more efficient, switching over the lighting and even the parking lot lighting, going to much more efficient lighting in the parking lots instead of using the old metal halide lights and stuff like that, which is a great cost up front, but then in the long run, you're saving money from your energy costs, and then also you're, reducing the need for that additional electricity. So you're hopefully reducing the coal. That's what we have here, coal burning electrical plant here in Green Bay. So if we can lessen that demand, that's less coal that has to be burned and less emissions that have to come out of that plant.
I heard one of our spiritual leaders at Oron Lions, he was saying there almost has to be these zones that you declare. You're going to have to tell people, we need this much space to protect our little farm, because all this toxic floating stuff can come in, and then guess what? It's in our field. So so the climate thing there is, we need to protect everybody else's stuff from coming over to your farm. and watch out what type of seeds you use. We need to share our seeds and bring our seeds back so that they're tough and resilient, and we can get our seeds to grow again.
I guess in my community we can look at doing less of the big industries, I guess, that a lot of us, you know, in our country maybe think about doing for economic reasons. But if you look at the devastation of it in the long run, I guess we need to look at Iitc as looking more to what we can use naturally from the land, and keeping it, you know, as pristine, I guess, as possible.
Some of our biologists back home have said that this could be an economic disaster for our fishermen, because the fish that few that get survive and did spawn this year, in the next 3 years in the salmon's life cycle, they may not be there to reproduce. And if there was only those few that got through this year, that means less and less are going to be there in 3 years, if any come back or whatever. And as tribal people for our area, if the salmon don't survive, we don't survive.
Our own community members, I think, is that awareness. It's who we elect. That's a big thing that we do. Again, the legacy of carbon that the United States government has put in our atmosphere, the impact is going to be felt by the tribes. It wasn't the tribes who profited from this. It was the big federal government and the corporations. That adaptation is that we need to understand that we can do something about it. We can adapt. We can survive. Simple thing like we increased heat events in Wisconsin. We have to make sure each and every one of our elders has air conditioning, has a contact. We check on them. Locally, that's where we have to act to make sure that we each survive this.
Well, I think the local community simply needs to understand that we are trying to not only educate the general public, but our lawmakers and the community at large about what the effects of climate change really are, and how they can help us in our efforts to educate Congress and affect real change.